back to your show. Former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney is well known and well liked by Colorado's Republicans. He overwhelmingly won the state's caucus as a presidential candidate back in February. So when he came to town last weekend to speak on behalf of his one-time opponent John McCain, he also took some time to answer your questions. Governor Romney, thank you so much for coming back to your show.
Good to be back.
First question comes from Stephanie Hayward, who says she was a former Republican turned independent. She's concerned about the state of the country and the lack of dignity and integrity, she writes, within its leadership. In a speech you delivered in Detroit, she said, you said that a sound economy is critical to the protection and sovereignty of this country and our values. She'd like you to expand on that point.
Well, you can't have a free and safe land if you don't have a strong military. And I don't think you can have a strong military if your economy's weak. Remember back in the days of the Soviet Union, they tried to keep up with us militarily, but couldn't because they had such a weak economy. And we have a strong economy. Right now we're in a temporary slowdown, but if you compare us with the rest of the world, America has a leading economy. I want to keep it that way. And for that to be kept that way, there are a number of things we're going to have to do. One is strengthen our schools, give our kids the skills they need to stay ahead. Two is invest in technology. At the public and private level, make sure we're at the very cutting edge in every form of technology so we can continue to have the kinds of jobs that our people want, the high-paying jobs that lift the entire nation. We got to keep the burden of government down. Don't let government get bigger and bigger and bigger and tap more and more away from the, if you will, the incentives and the initiatives that the individuals have in this country. We got to solve our health care crisis and get people health insurance that's affordable and that they can take with them as they go throughout their life. These are the kinds of things that have to be done to make sure our economy stays strong, which in turn will keep our military strong and our families strong, and that'll keep America the free and powerful nation it's always been.
You talked about the role of government. Paul Kincaid Smith writing in, what in your mind is the proper role of government? And he'd like to know if you think the federal government has drifted away from its proper role right now.
Well, I think the federal government has gotten too large and has taken on too much, and there are some who believe that we should stop looking to our individual initiative and personal responsibility, and instead expect government to take care of us from womb to tomb, and that government should pay for all of our costs and let us all live in the same way. And I reject that. That's not what made America what it is. We're a land of rugged individualists. Of course there ought to be a safety net, and we ought to care for those that are really needy, and of course we're going to care for our veterans and so forth. So there are legitimate roles of government. A military is a legitimate role of government, and we have to make sure we have a safety net there. But at the same time, government has gone well beyond that, and I believe that there are many programs that are unnecessary, duplicative, expensive, and a lot of pork comes out of Washington. Those are things that have to be cut back.
Businesses have complained for years just about tax structure, and as a businessman, this question certainly would appeal to you. I think Robert Liebross from Denver writes in saying, should government regulate business except to prevent the most obvious risks of harm?
Well, it should regulate with care, because anytime you regulate, you put a burden on business. And businesses are where we get our jobs, and businesses are also the places that create the value that allows us to have dollars that have worth. Every dollar we have in our economy represents a good or a service produced in the private sector. So you put regulations on business with care, and if you find one that's too burdensome and that doesn't have a great benefit, you take it off. And Sarbanes-Oxley has some of those that ought to be taken off. And there are other regulations. They ought to be pared back time and time again. That doesn't mean you don't have any regulation, but it does mean that the labyrinthian regulations that our businesses are burdened by today is simply too much for the American people and American enterprise to have to shoulder.
Here in your speech to the Colorado State Republicans, you talked about energy. And Chris Kapler writes in from Broomfield. He's an 18-year-old just graduating from high school, saying the Republican Party, his words, the only hope for true energy independence. And he wants to know why they're not joining former Speaker Gingrich in achieving the energy independence through his plan of drill here, drill now, pay less. Something that the Republican Party ought to embrace, you think?
Well, I think you're going to see Senator McCain lay out his policy to achieve energy independence and energy security. The Democrats and Republicans agree that we want ethanol, our renewable resources, we want solar power, wind power. There's a lot more we can do there, but that doesn't get us anywhere near as far as we need to get. Energy efficiency and conservation will help, but those don't get us there. We're going to have additional sources, and Republicans say yes to speeding up nuclear power, yes to additional drilling for oil and gas, and yes as well to coal technology that's clean and where we sequester the CO2. So Republicans want to develop the energy resources necessary and the ones that we have to get us energy independent.
You brought up Senator McCain, and Linda Eidenmuller writes in saying the Democratic Congress, led by Senator Reid, Speaker Pelosi, are constantly fighting with President Bush, Mr. McCain, the Republicans, and she wants to know, how do you think he plans to unite members of Congress to actually cooperate with plans and goals that he might have as president?
Well, you know, a crisis tends to concentrate the mind, and we're seeing crises in healthcare, in education. Our economy is fragile right now. We're looking around the world at the threat of radical violent jihad and terrorism. The attacks on the United States led to certain actions being taken. I think you're going to see that these crises are going to lead Republicans and Democrats, not all of them, but a number of those that really want to get the job done, to come together and actually succeed in overcoming some of the problems we have.
When you were last here in February when we talked to you, then you were campaigning for the state. You did very well in the state. You won Colorado. A number of people wrote in congratulating you and saying they had hoped you didn't drop out, but it kind of comes to what the next step is. Peg Sale writing in, Penelope Kimmel, James Vanderwall, wanting to know, you interested in being vice president?
I'm interested in seeing John McCain elected president. And vice president talk is all speculation at this point. It's not something I think about. It's not something Senator McCain is talking to folks about. So let's get him elected, and we'll see what happens down the road.
I wanted to ask you a personal question. Brian Olson writes in, and you spoke during your campaign about faith. There have been a lot of stories about Senator Obama and his church, Senator McCain, and a pastor who may have endorsed his campaign. Brian writes in saying, should faith be an issue in selecting a candidate, and can politics and faith mix?
Well, you know, I gave a speech on this, and it's a pretty lengthy speech, so I can't give all of that. But you do learn something about individuals based upon their beliefs, and I think what does relate to a person's ability to lead is fundamentally what are the values in their heart, whether they believe in God or not, but perhaps most importantly, do they believe that men and women and the people of the world are created equally, that we're a family of humanity? Do they believe in caring for the needy? Do they love liberty and think that liberty is a gift of the divine? These kinds of fundamental beliefs, I think, transcend different brands of faith, and have long been part of the faith heritage that our nation's freedom was built upon.
I think I told you before we started we had a chance to speak with former Secretary of State Albright this week, and she was saying about faith that you can't discount it, especially in world politics, that it's everywhere, that no matter how much you want to maybe set it to the side, it just is a part in every conversation in foreign policy as well.
Well, certainly today with the large divisions, particularly in the Middle East, that relate to faith, you have to be willing to understand those divisions and comprehend them as you think about policy. But in our own political system here, we don't choose people based on what religion they are. We never have, we never should. Of course it's relevant to say, what do you believe in your heart about humanity, about caring for others, and those kinds of things, I think, are transcendent of any particular religious doctrine.
Joe and Susie Toscano wrote in asking about your father. They wanted to know what advice from your father did you follow, and what advice did you ignore?
I followed most of my dad's advice. One thing he said with regards to politics, he said, Mitt, don't ever get involved in politics unless your kids are raised. And he felt that politics could turn your kids' heads and get them confused about who they were and how important they were. And he said, you know, you want to make sure your kids are raised. And I waited. I had my life in the private sector, established myself there before I got involved in politics. So I took that piece of advice. I can't think of advice he gave me that I didn't follow. He wanted me to go to law school, and I didn't want to go. And I wanted to go to business school, and we compromised. I went to both. So maybe that'll serve as my example.
It's a tough question. Governor Mitt Romney, thank you so much for being on your show. We appreciate it.
Thanks. Good to be with you.